Hey Banditos, welcome to the latest Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. But before we do that, let's introduce ourselves. As usual, I'm Joe Marcello.
And I'm Warren Phillips.
And today we're bringing you Orrin's interview with the man who Will Eisner called the grandfather of modern American graphic novels. Talking about Phil Ye.
Yeah, Phil is somebody who I came about reading a book about the origins of Comic-Con. His name kept coming up. He's somebody who goes to the beat of his own drummer. And I think that's a wonderful thing because his art, his stories, all this stuff, it's all inspired by things around him. And he just does it for the love of it. And he is the grandfather of modern graphic novels. He was one of the first to do it. He's going to talk about that. He's going to talk about a lot more. So here we go with Phil. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to speak to us.
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So
happy to be at home.
there you go. You've been traveling for quite a bit.
Yeah, we just did 2 murals in New Jersey and Long Island, New York.
So how does that come about? How do you get called in for things like that?
People go to our website, I guess, and they find us on the website. And this art teacher in New York, Long Island, yeah, she found us on the website. And then when Linda was talking to her, my wife was talking with her, somehow this other school in New Jersey at the same, except that it was extremely tiring because we don't normally do murals as big as the one we did in New Jersey, but the principal asked me, "Oh, can we do both walls?" Which was like 60 feet of walls. And, 2 days is a little bit, a little much. But anyway, we did it. So I'm surviving.
How fulfilling is it, though, for you to know that your art will be part of these children's school lives for years to come?
Oh, it's really fulfilling. It's the reason I do it. We started out, and I've been doing murals since I was 17, but we started, the Cartoonists Across America started in 1986. And originally, when we started painting murals, they were 4 feet by 8 feet on foam core. That was very doable in it. Somehow I got talked into doing bigger murals, city buses, trucks. We did a 54-foot semi truck in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Convention Center. Stan Sakai, Kevin Eastman, Wendy Penny, Mr. T, and Larry Wells and Mark Bodie are good friends, and thank God they were there because they use spray cans to really, we had 3 days to do it, but 54 feet on both sides is a lot of murals. But anyway, so we've done a lot of murals, over 2,000 in 49 states and 18 countries. So I guess I thought I was going to quit in the year 2000, but maybe I'll quit in year 4000.
So you got to be pretty good at what you do.
Yeah, it's really fun, and it really makes an impact because every kid, every student in the schools get a copy of one of my comics, which I haven't done a new comic in a few years, but we're almost out of them. So I guess I either have to reprint it or make a new one. I think I'm going to make a new one.
So going back to the very beginning, how did your journey into comics begin? How did you first discover comics?
It's funny, I didn't really read comics as a kid. My mother didn't approve of them, so I read real books. But read every book in in our school library, everything. Girls, boys, it didn't matter. I just read everything. And I loved Ray Bradbury. So I got hooked on Ray Bradbury's books. And so a friend of mine, I always drew. I've been drawing since I was 2 years old. And my father, I always joke, was cheap, but you don't need toys. Here's paper. And he gave me paper from work. He was an engineer. So he had this computer, big sheets of computer paper, and he would give me a stack every day. You know, it was printed on one side. It had the programs that ran off, but the other side was blank. So I had these big sheets of paper to draw, and I had crayons and I had pencils and so I just drew anything I wanted because, nobody cares. I mean, I'm just drawing for myself. But I started doing my own comics and my own books when I was about 5 or 6. And this led to a friend of mine and really changed my life. He saw an ad for the San Diego Comic-Con. It was called something else, but the first one was held in 1970. And he said, you ought to go down there and go to the convention. And I said, why? Because I had no interest in comics. So my dad had to drive me down there because I was going to turn 16 in 3 months, but I couldn't drive. My little sister, Kathy, went with me. She always makes sure I say that because she was really one of the very few girls. And I always joke, it was a convention of 300 boys who don't date. But anyway, I was there. Ray Bradbury was there. And Jack Kirby was there. They were sitting at a table. I said to Ray, I was thinking about being a writer, but I can't spell. I later learned, much later, like years later, I have dyslexia. I can read, but I can't spell. So I really didn't think I could be a writer. And Ray said, just write. They have editors. They'll clean up your spelling and your grammar. And I said, really? So that was a revelation. And Jack Kirby said, my dad was standing right behind me. And my father, is a Chinese engineer who thought I should be an engineer. I can't do math because I have dyslexia. I later learned that this dyslexia affects all these things. It never bothered me. All the kids in school would laugh when I got zeros on the spelling test. I didn't care. I just drew. I drew all getting, zeros, which is an F. I turned to Ray and I said, what college do I go to be a comic book artist? Because my friend Shane insisted I would be a great comic book artist. And I don't know, it was just, he was a comic book collector. He really loved comics. And so I knew Jack Kirby was because I had read some of Jack's books while his brother Kevin and I had a little poker thing going. We had our own casino since we were 12. That's how I made my money. And so in between massive poker games, I would read, Fantastic Four or whatever, just pick up a comic book. But Shane put them in bags, which I thought was really weird because they were 12 cents. And I couldn't understand what shape. I knew Jack Kirby was because, he did them. So I turned to Jack and I said, what college should I go to? And Jack looked at me and said, college? There's no college for comic book artists. Just do it. And that was great because my father was behind me. I didn't want to go to college because, I was going to turn 16 and everyone's talking about college. And I thought, I'm useless at school. I really don't, I'm not academically suited for tests and school. So I thought this is great. But as the eldest son of 4 kids, a Chinese engineer as a father, that wasn't in the cards. I was going to college. So, but I just do it. And so I said, 3 months later, I got my friends in high school and started my own publishing company. And we've been publishing ever since. And because I was never tied to the comic book world, I didn't know any of the rules or whatever, any of the history. So I learned, eventually, but I didn't care then, and I don't care now. I just published my own stuff, my own books, and I really didn't think about, the comic book world. But ironically, a lot of my friends are in the comics. Would go to conventions, and then afterwards, I would look them up, or when we didn't have Google, and I don't have a phone, so I would Google them and say, "Oh, this guy's pretty well known." But when I met Alfredo Alcala, and he came out to LA in '76, I guess, I just hit it off with Alfredo because he was someone who talked about everything. He never talked about comic books. We never talked about comics, but he loved a painter as well. And he just loved, life, history, anything. So, and I found that all my older friends, all the golden age artists that I got to know, they were the same way. They really didn't talk about comics. My generation, I won't mention any names, but there's some guys that they're fanboys. They're really into comic books, which is great, but they're really into, if you make a mistake, like you put, you don't draw Batman exactly like Batman, whatever. So it gets, I once said to Jack, I said, really, shouldn't all the Fantastic Four guys, shouldn't they be dead because they were exposed to all this radiation? And Jack, that was a joke, but it was like, you read these comic books and you think, this is absurd. But they go around the asteroid, whatever happened to them. They all have different ply. I love Bob Burton. Bob Burton's Flaming Carrot is right up my alley because it's absurd. And so I think of comics as fun. They're really fun. Tom Luther and I talk about it a lot. He likes the old days, when comics were fun. They weren't so dark. But I have to say, since I did one of the graphic, I'm glad that comics are, everything. They can be novels, they can be dark, they can be serious, they can be funny. They really have, and the best thing about it is they're not 12 cents.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because as an artist, as someone who makes a living, supposedly, how can you make money when something is 12 cents? And in the old days, yes, they could sell, a million copies of Superman or something, but even at a million copies, the artist wasn't making that much. So contrary to what I believe, when I first got into this business, I thought Jack Kirby, he must be rich. Well, that's wrong. And I learned that very quickly. And I think that was really great because I never worked for DC or Marvel or anybody, because I found I knew all these guys that worked in the field, and they worked really hard to not make a lot of money. And I really didn't like that. So as a publisher myself, I just thought, well, that's their business model. My business model is very different. And I think what's important and why I promote self-publishing is because artists need to make a living. And that's really important, because a lot of artists don't, aren't making a lot of money. Some comic book artists are making a lot of money, but it's a struggle.
You mentioned Jack Kirby, and I read the book "See You at San Diego," all about the creation of San Diego Comic-Con, and it sounds like he really was a man of the people. Like, he was not pretentious. He would sit down, he would talk to anyone about comics, about anything.
Yeah.
And he seems like he was the real deal, that he just was a normal guy who enjoyed getting to know people.
Yeah, he was a real guy. He was a real, it's something that I hold very close to my own heart. I'm 69 years old now, but as a 15-year-old kid, I was thinking, I just talk, Jack would talk to you like you were his equal. And that's how I talk to everyone. I really don't like some of the, I won't mention any names here, but some of the people have such egos. Their egos get in the way of being human. And this is, it's kind of a turnoff when you see a guy and you see a kid, asking a question. The kid doesn't know because he's a kid, and the guy is arrogant. And I think back to Jack. Jack was always so nice and friendly, and unlike, well, let's just say, other people who take a lot of credit they don't deserve. So I always say, when I speak at schools, I say I knew the guy that created much of the Marvel universe. I also knew Jerry Siegel and, Joe Shuster, and I helped them get their money. So, and other people take credit for that, but that's okay. The important thing is they got their money, but we were the first people to break the story. And I guess I set the record straight a few years ago, because I got tired of hearing other people, will say, take a lot of credit that, they knew the story after, we broke the story.
I want to talk about how you did that in a moment, but you brought up a very good point, that it seems now with social media, there's thousands of opinions coming out, and people are speaking on behalf of folks who maybe aren't around anymore. People are speaking on topics that they weren't even around for. Is it difficult to find the truth in comic books now about the history of comics, or has it become so muddled that we'll never really know the exact facts?
Well, I think it's always hard to get to the truth, because a lot of times when I was going on, I think the comic book press, or the whatever you want to call it, has always been like the old what do they call the game where you have five people in a room, one person says something that passes on to the other, and then by the time the other the last guy hears it, it's a totally different story. There's a lot of that, maybe more than that, in the comic book world. I think because the regular world, the normal world, doesn't, it's like when the mainstream media covers comic book conventions, they always used to cover it the same way. And and the reporters, I've been interviewed so many times, and I have fun with it because they don't know. So I just make up things because they don't know. So I just figure, well, why don't we just have some fun and just make up a story and make it wild? And they're not even listening. So, because I've been interviewed so many times by mainstream media, they have no idea what anything is. So I just have, fun with them because otherwise you get crazy. When they print the stories, it's so, the Siegel and Schuster thing is a good example. I've been quoted in many books as being everything from a Filipino hippie, a dope smoking hippie in one guy's book. I'm not Filipino. I never have smoked marijuana ever in my life. Roberta Gregory never touched it. Roberta did the first cover for Uncle Jam, our magazine. So it's like, wow. And these stories get repeated, and they get, the weird facts get, carried, made up. It's like the so-called journalists that are doing these stories, they read the other guy's story, and then, and it becomes really, you have to have a sense of humor. You have to. And so I do,
So what's
but
the greatest,
I was just
gonna say, what's the greatest story you ever told the press?
I've said some pretty weird things. I just got a haircut. So my hair tends to be pretty long. So I had long hair, and a front page article in our newspaper in Long Beach, I said, I'm not cutting my hair until I have $1 million or something. It's like, I just say things that come to, then it gets printed. And then, the next thing I'll cut my hair, and I'll still be broke. But it's silly to me. I never had any interest in money, first of all. And I never had the only thing I ever wanted to do was not have a job, a real job, or as my wife likes to say, a boss. I just, the idea of earning a living from my art has always been, even if I'm happy, if I make a lot of money, I'm really happy, I guess, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. And I think I learned that really early on. I had a gallery in Long Beach in 1976, and I did 30 paintings, and each painting was $500. And we opened up the gallery. I didn't sell anything for 2 weeks. My partner was going crazy. He was thinking we should sell plants. So it made no sense. And this doctor came in as chiropractor, and he wanted to buy all. I had the gallery filled with 300 or 30 paintings. And I said, why don't you just buy one or two, and I can pay the rent, and I still have a gallery with something in there. The guy bought all the paint. He pulled out a wad of bills, and I said, we're sold. So he bought all the paintings, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I worked for a company, and so I called a friend of mine who was doing these big paintings for IBM, and she was, I was 21, and I said, "Can you loan me your paintings, while you're working on, for IBM, so just so I can fill the gallery while I get to work." So she did, and we started making serigraphs, and there's one behind me, Jean Giraud Mobius gave me. He did serigraphs as well, but yeah, that was a interesting time, because when I met Jean, it was at Los Angeles at a comic book convention, and I was standing in a long line of people waiting to meet, Mobius. And I was just hoping this guy was a nice guy, because I had no idea. And I never stood, I'm too lazy. But I stood in line, and I got up to the front of the line, and I said, "John, I really admire your work. This is an 82 or 83. And John looked up, and I said my name, and John looks up at me and says, "I'm a fan of yours." And I didn't believe him. I said, "You're a fan of my, how?" France, and he said, I have your books." So I didn't believe him. I was living in Long Beach at the time. A week later, he came with 2 serigraphs framed up the stair, up the steps of my house. And I said, maybe this guy might be a fan. I don't know. But we hit it off, and, he became a very good friend. So I have to say that, life is very strange, but,
Turns out all right.
it was, yeah, it turns out very good. I've met a lot of people, not just comic book artists, but, musicians and actors, whatever, just who are really nice, really down to earth. Like Jack Kirby was very down to earth. And I think that's really important to me, because I think, Mobius, Jean Giraud, could have been a real arrogant guy, so I don't, and it's a luck of the draw, I guess. Well, I think most people are nice. I'd say 90% of them are really nice. It's only 10% who have, in any field, they just get caught up in their own press, their own, "Oh, I'm important, I'm a big star," whatever. And it's like, nobody, to me, everyone's the same, everyone is exactly the same. And I think this notion of stardom, this guy used to be #1 at the box office. Yeah, but you look now, and people, David McCallum only had 2 lines in People magazine, 2 lines, no picture. I was amazed. I just couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, that says it all.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. They have stories on all these people every week. I haven't even heard that. Thinking, wow. So anyway, what's the question?
I want to jump back to Siegel and Schuster, because how did you find out about what was going on with them, and what was your initial reaction?
Well, this was incredible. I was art director for a small paper in Long Beach, part-time, like 1-2 days a week. And it was called the Marina News, and it was weekly. And the editor was 82-year-old Helen Arterburn. I was like, 21 or whatever. And I was publishing my own, Cobblestone. Uncle Jam became Cobblestone because my partners thought Uncle Jam was a weird name. It was. And then when I got rid of the partners, I changed it back to Uncle Jam. Anyway, so Helen Arterburn got this like 11 pages. It was a rant. It was a rant from Jerry Seaman, and she was going to throw it in the garbage because it was 11 pages. Like it was like I always say to people, it was like a Unabomber, issuing a manifesto. And so she said, Phil, you might be interested in this. I was publishing a monthly. And I said, what is it? And she showed it to me. And I recognized immediately, I don't know comics that well, but I knew who Jerry Siegel was, the creator of Superman. I didn't realize he was not only broke, he was working as a messenger in, offices in LA. And I was just, I was reading this rant, very, upsetting. Here's a guy who created Superman, is broke. It makes no sense. And so I knew they were making a movie, Superman the movie with Christopher Reeves. So I called him and we interviewed him. Randy Koch and I went up and did an interview in his apartment, as I remember. And but I told him, I said, Jerry, I have a small paper, but I know that the Los Angeles Times, which is pretty big, reads my paper. Because the editor told me. And she said, we love to steal your stories. When you have a good story, we love to, we have another reporter go out and do the same story, which was great. I felt really honored. And so I said, Jerry, I think I'll write the story. I'll call New York and I'll talk to Warner's and see what I can get the ball rolling, because they're not going to want the publicity. It's going to make them look terrible. The creators of Superman are broke. Meanwhile, we're making a movie, So, the guy at Jay Emmett was his name. He was vice president. He called me back. He didn't realize I was 21. I didn't tell him. But I said, I'm going to run this story about how, the creators of Superman are broke. Do you have any comment? And he said, I'll get back to you. And he did. And, he worked it out, and Neil Adams and Jerry Robinson, the story, the comic book world picked up the story. Well, everyone picked up the story. The LA Times ran the story, I think, 3 days after we published, which goes to prove that they, read Uncle Cobblestone, because, nobody else in the world cared at the time. Suddenly, the story, when the Los Angeles Times ran it, the New York Times, everybody. In fact, Siegel and Schuster were on television, and they got a settlement. I think it was $40,000 a year for life, plus medical insurance, plus the most important thing. Well, to me as a creator, they got their names restored, to the films. It says Superman is created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, which was pretty significant because at that, in the old days when I was starting out, creators didn't even get credit a lot of times, and then they got little tiny credit. And so when I did that first graphic novel in 1970, one of the first, I put my name really big on the cover, and I knew that I wasn't that good an artist. I was young, but I knew that a lot of, I was charging $5 for my book. It was 8.5 by 11. And I really didn't think about comic book stores told me, they said, where do you expect us to put this book? Because there's spinner racks. Guys, my book was bigger. That was problem number one. Secondly, I was charging $5, which is audacious. And then, I have my name huge on the cover. I had Sergio Aragones, who's a good friend, and Don Rigo. Don Rigo, Sergio introduced me to Don. And so I had their names on the cover. I figured I have to do everything I can to, get attention. And people started thinking, who's this kid doing a graphic novel? So for a year, that was when Will Eisner, next year he does one, and he's the first. They call him the father of the graphic novels. So I said, well, all right, that's fine. Well, I'll be the godfather of the graphic novel. And I like the term godfather anyway. So it sounded great. Will was a great guy. He wrote a great quote for one of my books. And I think everybody in this field who has been forward thinking, and really we are now at a great time, because anybody can do anything they want. It can be a serious book, it can be funny, but the really important thing is the packaging, hardcover. Richard Kyle, who coined the term graphic novel in 1964, and didn't do a book until 1976, 6 months before I put mine out. But anyway, Richard was a great guy. He was a real mentor to me. And he said, a graphic novel should be a book that can stay in print as long as the public wants to read it. And that was so important, because he wanted to break out of the periodical, every month. Here's the Superman number 400, whatever. The problem with that is, with a graphic novel, you have a chance to read it like Tom Sawyer. You can still read, I don't know if you read Tom Sawyer, maybe it's not politically correct, but, a real book. And that was what Richard really wanted to make his statement for. It should be a book. And I think that so many people, Art Spiegelman, Mouse, in 1982, I was invited to speak to Art's class. And when I got there, Scott McCloud, a student of Art named Scott McCloud, and the other guy called Adam Phillips, they invited me. And they took me to the school. And after I was done talking about graphic novels in 1982, I said, we had coffee afterwards, Art and I. You have to take Mouse from his little comic book thing. He was publishing a magazine called Raw, and he was putting Mouse in serial, installments. And I said, this should be a graphic novel, a real graphic novel. And Art argued with me like crazy. In fact, we continued the argument for a couple more trips. So I was in New York a lot. And he just kept arguing, no publisher will take it. And I think he was rejected by 20. Shows you how dumb the publishing industry is, because when Mouse was published, finally, it won the Pulitzer Prize. And, it's gone on into every accolade under the sun. And Art doesn't speak to me anymore. He's one of these people who becomes, so big. He's now Art Spiegelman. And I'm mentioning his name, I shouldn't, but so what? The point is, I think it's really great that the book, is everywhere. You can get it. You can still get it at Barnes and Noble, or wherever. That was Richard Kyle's vision. That was the vision of graphic novels. It's comic book material, but not, throwaway. That 12 cents, and well, you put it in plastic bags if you're a collector, but you know what I mean. A normal people fold it up, put it in their back pocket, read it. It's for kids. And that is the reason my mother never liked comic books. She didn't look at the art. She didn't look at the mastery. She reads real books. But I thought, no, there's a lot of, not all comic books are great. By far are, wow, they're really good. And they deserve a lot more attention than just, why are novels? This is one of my biggest sore points. Some of my friends who have gotten rather famous and rich, they sell to Hollywood, to films, to movies. And I always thought, to me, the comic book is just as valid as a movie or a film. Nobody else agrees with me, but this is it. Because the film studios and the TV people who have approached me have always wanted to change my work. Forget it. That's why there is no movie and TV show. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't care. I think that's my attitude. I don't care. I think what's important to me is the story. It's from me. It's Charles Schulz, who I didn't know well, but I knew. Charles Schulz drew every episode of Peanuts, every word, every line of his strip. He didn't take any suggestions from his wife or his kids. He didn't care. He just wanted to. The Peanuts was Charles Schulz. And I love that, because that's, there's a lot of creators, especially comic strips. There are guys who put their name on something. They don't even draw it. They don't even write it. And, I'm not going to mention any more names here, but the point is, I believe an artist, that's my belief. An artist should do it himself. So, but I've probably offended half my friends.
I'm curious about the hustle that it took, because like you said, you're an independent.
I'm sorry?
I'm just curious about the hustle to put that graphic novel out, because here you are, an independent creator, making this $5 book that doesn't fit on spinner racks. How are you getting it out to people, and how are you trying to get word of mouth out about this book that you created?
Thank God it was a start of the direct distribution. Phil Stooling was in New York, and Bud Plant was in Grass Valley. Bud Plant and Phil, I printed 1,000 copies, and they bought like 500 each. So I was golden. Mm-hmm. They bought, and not only that, but I put out a graphic novel every year, and sometimes 2 or 3 for 15 years. I found a letter recently, I'm going through my storage, from Phil, and I have to say that would not happen today with, everything's changed, and it's a shame. But, well, it's the right time, right place, I guess, because they allow me to experiment and change my style, change the characters, change whatever I wanted. Everything. I had complete freedom. And, it was great for me, because it gave me an opportunity to just create freely. and it's really what everything that I always advocated. When you're a writer, an artist, I'm not my own editor because I can't spell. That hasn't changed, but and I'm not my own colorist. I have had very good luck. First with Tom Luth, who became Sergio Aragonés colorist, but Leva Yerger is a good friend of mine, and she did the covers for my books, and she did a brilliant job. And she colors, when I do books in color. So she's done some wonderful work. And again, she's not of the comic book world, thank God. So she doesn't realize that they don't make any money. Tom Luth is always telling me that he would get paid. He's retired today for doing a page than he did 30 years ago, which makes no sense, which is another reason I'm not in the business, in the industry or whatever they call it.
You do a lot of comics, and I know literacy for children is such an important thing for you. How do you write for children? Because you don't want to go above their heads, but you also don't want to insult their intelligence. You want to sort of let them, figure out the story themselves.
It's funny.
Go ahead.
I've always written exactly the same way when I was a kid, when I was, let's say 15, 16, but I was writing earlier than that. I would tell stories to my friends. I draw them out, draw the pages out, give one kid a page, he pass it on to the next kid. I would draw another page and keep it going. And so I didn't use a lot of big words because I can't spell. And I don't think the idea is so important. And the ideas are very convoluted. Some of my stories are very crazy, but kids of all ages, they still read them. And I know this. I was just in New York and New Jersey, and so many kids, they all get a book. They all said to me, "Hey, I read your story. I really liked it." So I think that's why I don't really care about what the experts say or what vocabulary you. I don't know, and I don't care anyway. I just tell stories, and people that read them, those who do, they tell me they like them. And I write humorous, and I write my Winged Tiger series. I have guest stars because I always talk about my friends, and people say, "Oh yeah, really, so and so." So I started thinking 20 years ago, everybody thinks I'm just, BSing. So I started having my friends be in the books, and I'm really happy that George Lucas consented to be in one of the books, because some of the people are not really known to, the average person, but I've been lucky. I have certain people that, they're still, I think he get more than two lines in People magazine when he passes. I think it's really important, though, that you just make stories that are really, they come from the heart. They have a point, but they come from the heart. And there's only one consistency in all my work. I don't have any violence and any guts. That's probably another reason I'm not a Marvel movie, but that's okay. I grew up in an area of Los Angeles when I was 6 till I was 16. It was called, some people would call it a ghetto, but it was an area outside of Watts, and I really detest guns, and I'm not going to get into a gun argument here. I just don't like guns. And, you know, my relatives in Indiana were hunters. So I understand hunting deer, but, I don't think these guns are for hunting deer. So that's my do anything with guns and anything with, violence, period. I just don't think you need to tell a story with violence, which probably really, I think about it now, destroys the plots for every Marvel movie produced because they're always hitting someone, shooting, and I understand it. I like action movies. I watch action movies, but that doesn't mean I have to draw action movie.
I can say, because as a father, and I see kids, with Deadpool T-shirts on and Deadpool toys, and he's one of the most violent, sadistic people in comics, and yet they've sort of made him kid friendly in the sense of toys and merchandise and stuff, and it's a very bizarre thing.
Yeah. Well, it's called money.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood is a machine that has learned to maximize making money. And I always say to people, I know how to make money. I don't care about money, so I don't have any, but I know how to make money. I don't think it's that hard to understand. Most people in the world are not, especially in the suburbs, they're not touched by violence. So I can understand. They want some excitement. They want, in their lives are pretty dull. So they want somebody shooting and driving off cliffs and, whatever, or having superpowers, flying through the sky. I understand perfectly. I really do. I make fun of this all the time in my comics because it's ridiculous, but I understand why. I always used to joke with all the creators. I say, we have so many, there should be no crime. It should not exist because we have, a million superheroes with every power under the sun. But, it's like these Marvel movies. I've seen a couple of them, and there's so many characters. There's so many heroes. It's like, it's mind-boggling when you watch, 500 people on the screen. It's like, who's the good guy? So I prefer a quieter. He's still action movies, but not 500 guys that whatever. But I understand why they're popular, and they're going to make lots of money, and people buy their toys and Deadpool, whatever. But that's okay. The only complaint I have about current state of affairs is that San Diego Comic-Con has become so much about toys, merchandise, movies, and not about books, not about reading, and that's what I really, whatever the comic book's about, it's about something, and you have to read it. In the old days, you had to read it. Nowadays, I don't think that the average fan of Superman or whatever really reads Superman. I see at the San Diego Comic-Con, I've been there since the beginning. I had a table the second year. That shows you how crazy I am. And I think it's really funny because I think in a way the industry has kind of looked at me like, Phil's still here, but I still am, and somebody must like me because they gave me an inkpot award a few years ago, which I never expected. And I think, it's okay. As long as you're reading something, it doesn't matter. But I dislike when you're not reading anything, but you're a fan of Batman or whatever, and you don't even read. You don't have to, because you can watch movies or TV. And there was a thing on Sunday morning I was watching today. It was a tape show, and it said our attention span is like 27 years. They were interviewing these two younger women who they watch their phone while they're watching a movie. They're doing 7 things. How do they even know what's going on? But anyway, so this is a new world. Yeah. It's a different world. So I can't comment on it because I don't have a phone and I'm not going to get one. But I found out, I was just in Pennsylvania, and the Amish people, they told me they don't have phones. So now I'm thinking that this is ruining my chances for being the last person on earth without a phone. Now I'm hoping the Amish really have phones, but somebody said that they don't, but I have to investigate that.
They're catching up to you.
Oh God. But I really love the simplicity. We went out to Amish country. I just love the fact that they're, horse and buggies, that, they have such a good, simple life. It really, really gives me pause, to think about, my grandkids, Oh, but anyway, go ahead.
I just have one last question. You know, be mindful of your time. It seems in the industry now, the idea is, a lot of graphic novels, a lot of collected edition omnibuses. When writers take a book, they want to only do 6 issues so they can just get together to do a graphic novel. Do you think the days of a single issue comic is dying, or do you think that it will still live on some way, shape, or form?
I don't really know, because like I said, I don't really read comics. When my friends do them, they often give me their latest book, but I'm not really clear on the numbers, how many issues or what do they sell, but I think the idea in 6 comic books, putting them together, making a graphic novel is really this is not what Richard Kyle had in mind. Richard Kyle believed if you're going to write a Batman story, you write beginning, middle, and end in one book right there, and that book is published. And it has to have a beginning, middle, and end in one book. That is his definition and mine of a graphic novel, like a real novel. It doesn't, you don't have to read the other books. You can still understand what's going on. The character could be, continuing character like James Bond, but the one episode, the one graphic novel has to be, in my mind, beginning, middle, and end. And I think that is my rule, for writing graphic novels. I mean, you try to make it so a person comes in from Mars and sits down and reads this and can understand it if they could speak English or whatever language, but they would understand what's going on. And I think that is, if you follow that rule, what I've seen, the graphic novels, supposedly graphic novels, they're not graphic novels. They're just, collected. And it's like the variant covers. It's like 50 issues of the same book that, oh, don't get me started. I've done so many satires about this stuff. I think about the industry. Number one sells 100,000 copies. Number two sells 50,000. But by your time number 5 comes out, you're in negative numbers. What kind of industry would have this as a model for business? It's absurd. And so that's the reason that I never participated. I thought, this is crazy, and so I said, well, I'm not playing. We just do what we want. And we don't want to do that. I'll tell you that. As a publisher, I want to sell more copies of a book down the road. I want to sell less. It doesn't make any sense. So that's something I'm a strong proponent of independent publishers, independent bookstores, and just getting it out, whatever, I'm really thinking, I'm talking to a lot of young artists, I meet at these conventions, smaller conventions, the basics, that's the future for our industry. I don't know, the way we're marketing comic books, it's a little bit dubious from what I hear. I don't know personally, because I'm not carried by Diamond, now, and but again, I don't really care. So this is kind of like my attitude about things. I just think, well, I'm still alive. I'm still doing this stuff. What the heck? Maybe like the Amish, we'll have our own network of just people that don't have cell phones.
There you go, see?
And we're back. This was a cool interview. So just a little behind the scenes. So, I edit all these interviews that we work on for you guys, and I learn quite a bit, even the stuff that I'm not a part of. And I really enjoyed working on and listening to this interview. So, Oren, that was a great job. And it was just, cool learning about this guy's career, in that, we mentioned it earlier before we started recording, just the fact that he did everything on his own, created his own content, and really, with all the people that he's known over the years in the comic book industry, never really, jumped into mainstream work, although he could probably do so very easily. But he's owned it, and it's, he's doing great.
Yeah, thanks to Phil, and I got to thank his wonderful wife, Linda. They sent my children a big stack of their comic books that they've created, kids' comics. My kids love them. They pass them back and forth, trading them. So it's just a gift to have those. Phil is somebody, he's doing murals at different schools. I mean, great thing, bringing art to children. He does so much wonderful things, and he's a guy that, it's one of those names I think more people should know. And we're hoping that this certainly opens more people's eyes to all the great things he does. So thank you again for being on the show, Phil. Thank you all for listening. Remember, as we always say, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends. Let's get this thing really growing. And we will see you next week.